Not for a short time, a year ago, I stood here before you alone and spoke a few truths about the rest of the Western world, which were received with some surprise and amazement, mostly by the Western political, economic, and media establishment, the economic and media establishment of the West. And I must admit that in a way I understand him. The president of a country that has faced economic failure for over a century. As a result, it has taken a passive stance in major world conflicts and closed itself off to trade, losing almost all international significance over the years. The president of this country stands at this podium and tells the whole world that they are wrong, that collapse awaits them, that the West has lost its way and must be brought back to it. The president of this country, Argentina, who was not a politician, who had no legislative support, no support from governors, businessmen, or media groups. In that speech, I said, this marks the start of a new Argentina. Argentina has suffered from socialism for too long. With us, it will return and once again embrace the ideas of freedom, the model summarized by defending life, liberty, and private property. And I also told them that, in a way, Argentina was the ghost of the West's Christmas future. We've already been through what you're experiencing and knew how it would end. A year later, I have to say that I no longer feel so lonely. I don't feel so lonely anymore because the world has accepted Argentina. Argentina has become a global example of financial responsibility, commitment to our obligations, how to solve the problem of inflation, as well as a new way of doing business and a new way of doing politics, which is to tell people the truth directly and believe that people will understand it. I don't feel lonely because throughout this year I've managed to find allies in this fight for the ideas of freedom in every corner of the planet. From the remarkable Elon Musk to the passionate Italian woman, my dear friend Giorgia Meloni, from Bukele in El Salvador to Viktor Orban in Hungary, from Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel to Donald Trump in the United States, an international alliance is gradually forming among all those nations that want to be free and believe in the ideas of freedom. And over time, what appeared to be total left-wing dominance in politics, in educational institutions, in the mass media and the press, in politics, in academic institutions, in the media, in supranational organizations, or at forums like Davos, it is collapsing and hope for freedom is starting to emerge. Today, I'm here to say our battle isn't over, even though hope has returned. We have a moral and historical duty to destroy the unhealthy ideological structure of Guatsism. Until we succeed in restoring our historical cathedral, until we succeed in making the majority of Western countries once again embrace the ideas of freedom, until our ideas become common currency. In the corridors of events like this, we cannot give up because, I must say, forums like this have been the protagonists and promoters of the sinister agenda of Gakism, which does so much harm to the West. If we want to change, if we truly want to defend the rights of citizens, we must start by telling them the truth. And the truth is that there is something deeply wrong in the ideas that are promoted at forums like this. I'd like to take a few minutes today to discuss some of them. Few now deny that winds of change are blowing in the West. There are those who resist change, there are those who accept it reluctantly, but in the end they accept it. Some new converts see them as inevitable. Some of us have spent our lives fighting for their arrival. Each of you knows which group you belong to. Surely in this hall there is a bit of each, but all of you. You undoubtedly realize that the time for change is knocking at the door. Moments of historical change have their own specifics. This is a time when formulas that worked for decades become exhausted and ways of doing things no longer make sense. What was once seen as absolute truth is eventually questioned. This is a time when the rules are being rewritten, and that's why this era rewards those who have the courage to take risks. Most of the free world still chooses familiar comfort, even if it's the wrong path, and keeps following failed methods. And the great anvil that serves as the common denominator in countries and institutions that are collapsing is the mental virus of woke ideology. This is the great epidemic of our time that must be cured. It is a cancer that needs to be removed. This ideology has colonized the most important global institutions, from parties and governments of free Western countries to global governance organizations, NGOs, universities, and the media, and has also shaped the course of the global conversation over the past decades. Until we remove this vile ideology from our culture, our institutions, and our laws, Western civilization and even the human race will not be able to return to the path of progress that our pioneering spirit demands. We must break these ideological chains if we want to enter a new golden age, and that is why today I want to take a few minutes to break these chains. First, let's discuss what we're fighting for. The West represents the pinnacle of the human race. On the fertile ground of its Greco-Roman heritage and Judeo-Christian values, the seeds of something unprecedented in history were planted. By finally prevailing over absolutism, liberalism ushered in a new era in human existence within these new moral and philosophical frameworks that place individual freedom above the whims of a tyrant. The West was able to unleash human creativity, and the West managed to unlock human potential, initiating an unprecedented process of wealth creation. The facts speak for themselves. Until 1800, the world's gross domestic product per capita remained almost unchanged. But since the 19th century, thanks to the Industrial Revolution, gross domestic product per capita has increased 20-fold. This allowed 90% of the world's population to escape poverty, even though the population increased 8-fold. And this became possible only thanks to the convergence of fundamental values, respect for life, freedom of property, which made free trade, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and other pillars of Western civilization possible. To this is added our inventive, exploratory, innovative Faustian spirit, which always tests the boundaries of what is possible, a pioneering spirit that today is represented among others. My dear friend Elon Musk, who has been unfairly smeared by the wokeism of recent times for an innocent gesture that only showed his dedication and gratitude to people. In short, we invented capitalism based on savings, investment, labor, reinvestment, and hard work. We made it so that every worker could increase their productivity by 10, 100, or even, why not, 1,000 times, thus overcoming the Malthusian trap. However, at some point in the 20th century, we lost our way, and the liberal principles that made us free and prosperous were betrayed. The new political class, guided by collectivist ideology and taking advantage of times of crisis, saw a great opportunity to accumulate power. All the wealth created by capitalism up to that point would in the future be redistributed according to a certain centralized planned scheme, which would become the starting point for the process. We are suffering from the severe consequences of this process today. By promoting a socialist agenda while cunningly operating within the liberal paradigm, this new political class has distorted the values of liberalism. Thus, they replaced freedom with liberation, using the coexisting power of the state to redistribute the wealth created by capitalism. Their justification became the sinister, unjust, and repugnant idea of social justice, supplemented by a Marxist theoretical foundation aimed at liberating people from their needs. And at the core of this new value system lies the fundamental premise that equality before the law is not enough, since there are hidden underlying injustices that must be eliminated. What represents a goldmine for bureaucrats with a desire for omnipotence? This essentially is the essence of Guasism. It is the result of an inversion of Western values. Each pillar of our civilization has been replaced by a distorted version of itself through the introduction of various mechanisms of cultural subversion. From negative rights to life, liberty, and property, we have moved to an artificially endless number of positive rights. First it was education, then housing, and then such humiliating things as internet access, soccer on television, theater, cosmetic procedures, and many other desires were turned into fundamental human rights. Rights that, of course, someone has to pay for, and that can only be guaranteed by the endless expansion of an aberrant state. In other words, from the concept of freedom as a fundamental protection of the individual from the interference of the tyrant, we have moved to the concept of liberation through state intervention. It was on this basis that Gochuan built a regime of one-sided thinking supported by various institutions whose goal is to criminalize and suppress dissent. Feminism, diversity, inclusion, equality, immigration, abortion, ecology, gender ideology, all of these are simply heads of the same creature whose goal is to justify the advancement of the state through the appropriation and distortion of noble aims. Let's take a look at some of them. Radical feminism is a distortion of the concept of equality, and even in its most benevolent form, it is unnecessary, since equality before the law already exists in the West. Everything else is a search for privileges, which is exactly what radical feminism does, setting one half of the population against the other when they should be on the same side. We've even reached the point where, in many supposedly civilized countries, the murder of a woman is called femicide and is punished more severely than the murder of a man simply because of the victim's gender. In fact, this legalizes the idea that a woman's life is worth more than a man's while raising the banner of the gender pay gap. But if you look at the data, it becomes clear that there is no inequality when performing the same work, and most men generally earn a higher salary than most women. Subtitles created by At the same time, they don't complain that most prisoners are men, or that most plumbers are men, or that most victims of robberies or murders are men, not to mention most people who died in wars. But if you bring these issues up in the media, or even on this forum, we're labeled as haters just because we're defending the basic principle of modern democracy and the rule of law, equality before the law and data. Guauquism also appears in extreme sinister environmentalism and climate change activism. Protecting our planet for future generations is common sense. No one wants to live in a dump. But once again, Guauquism managed to distort this simple idea of preserving the environment for people's enjoyment. We have moved on to fanatical environmentalism, where humans are seen as a cancer that must be eradicated, and economic development is nothing more than a crime against nature. However, when someone claims that there have already been 5 cycles of drastic temperature changes on Earth, and that in 4 of them humans didn't even exist, we are branded as denialists to discredit us, even though science and data are on our side. It's no coincidence these same people are the main promoters of the violent abortion agenda. This agenda is based on the Malthusian premise that overpopulation will destroy the Earth. That's why we have to implement some kind of population control mechanism. In fact, this has already been taken to such an extreme that the planet is starting, that today on the planet it is becoming a problem to control. Population growth is becoming a problem. What goal did they set for themselves with these abortive deviations? At these forums, they pushed the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender agenda, insisting women are men and men are women based only on self-perception without further explanation. About a man dressing up as a woman and killing his opponent in the boxing ring? Or about a prisoner who claims to be a woman and then rapes every woman he meets in prison? A few weeks ago, 2 American gay men made global headlines for displaying the flag of sexual diversity and receiving 100-year prison sentences. For more than 2 years, they abused their adopted children and filmed them on camera. I want to clarify that when I talk about violence, it's not a euphemism, because in its most extreme forms, gender ideology is outright violence against children, not pedophiles. That's why I want to know who approves of such behavior. They cause irreversible harm to healthy children through hormone therapy and mutilating surgeries. As if a child under the age of 5 could consent to this, and if it happens that the family does not agree, there will always be government representatives ready to step in for the interests of the child, which they call the best interests. Believe me, the outrageous experiments being carried out today in the name of this criminal ideology deserve condemnation, especially when compared to those conducted during the darkest times in our history. Covering up these many disgusting practices, the eternal victim is always ready to burst out with accusations of homophobia, transphobia, and other inventions. The sole purpose of which is to try to silence those who condemn this scandal, in which national and international authorities are involved. Meanwhile, in our companies, government, and schools, merit has been sidelined by diversity doctrine, resembling a return to old aristocratic systems. Quotas are invented for any minority that politicians can think of, which only undermines the excellence of these institutions. Bakeism has also distorted the essence of migration. Free movement of goods and people is at the core of liberalism. We know that Argentina, the United States, and many other countries became great thanks to immigrants who left their homelands in search of new opportunities. However, instead of trying to attract foreign talent to promote development, we have shifted to mass immigration, motivated not by national interests, but by a sense of guilt. Because the West is blamed for all historical evils, it must atone by opening its borders to everyone, leading to reverse colonization and what seems like collective suicide. And this is exactly what we see today in the images of hordes of immigrants mocking, raping, or killing European citizens whose only sin was not adhering to a certain religion. But if anyone questions these situations, they are branded as a racist, xenophobe, or Nazi. Buckism has penetrated our society so deeply, promoted by institutions like this one, that even the very idea of sex has come under question through the vile gender ideology. This has led to even greater government intervention through absurd legislation. For example, the state must fund hormones and surgeries to align with certain individuals' self-perception. We are just now seeing the effects of a generation that, influenced by a culture of sexual relativity, has altered their bodies and will need lifelong psychiatric treatment to cope with their actions. But no one says anything about these problems. Moreover, they have subjected the overwhelming majority to a slavish attitude toward the mistaken self-perceptions of a tiny minority. Backism also aims to control our future by holding positions at the world's top universities. It shapes the elite of our countries, making them challenge and deny the culture, ideas, and values that made us great, and thus further destroying our social structure. What is left for the future if we teach our youth to be ashamed of our past? All of this began and developed more noticeably in recent decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's interesting that free countries began to self-destruct when they ran out of opponents they could defeat. Peace made us weak. Our own complacency defeated us. All these and other deviations, which we won't list, threaten the West today and, unfortunately, are beliefs that institutions like this have been promoting for 40 years. No one here can play innocent. For decades, they worshipped a sinister, murderous ideology like a golden calf and did everything possible to impose it on humanity. This organization and major supranational bodies were the ideologists behind this barbarism. Multilateral credit agencies were the extortionist arm, and many nation-states, particularly the European Union, were and remain the armed hand. Or today in the United Kingdom, aren't citizens being imprisoned for exposing monstrous, truly horrifying crimes committed by Muslim migrants that the government wants to cover up? Or didn't the bureaucrats in Brussels suspend the elections in Romania just because they didn't like the party that won first place? In the face of each of these discussions, whoism tries to discredit those who question these things, first by labeling us and then by censoring us. If we're white, then you're a racist. If you're a man, you must be a misogynist or a member of the patriarchy. If you're rich, you must be a ruthless capitalist. If you're heterosexual, you must be heteronormative, homophobic, or transphobic. For every issue, they have a label, which they then try to censor either de facto or de jure. Because beneath the talk of diversity, democracy, and tolerance that they claim, there is actually a clear desire to destroy dissent, criticism, and essentially freedom in order to keep supporting the model from which they themselves are the main beneficiaries. Or haven't we heard those days when capital used to hide? Some European authorities, quite left-leaning, let's say, openly call for censorship. openly call for censorship or claim that, in fact, there is no censorship at all. But those who think differently from the woke ideology must be silenced. And what kind of society can wokeism lead to? A society where the free exchange of goods and services is replaced by the arbitrary distribution of wealth at gunpoint, free communities are replaced by forced collectivization, and the creative chaos of the market is replaced by the sterile and sclerotic order of socialism. A society full of discontent where there are only two types of people, those who pay taxes on one side and those who benefit from the state on the other. I don't mean those who are on welfare because they can't afford to eat. I'm talking about privileged corporations, bankers who were bailed out during the crisis, most of the media, and indoctrination centers disguised as universities. Government bureaucracy, labor unions, public organizations, state-owned companies, and all sectors that live off the taxes paid by those who work. I'm talking about the world described by Ayn Rand in Atlas Shrugged, which unfortunately has materialized. A system in which the political class ends up as the winner and in turn becomes both the arbiter and a stakeholder in this distribution. I repeat, the political class is both the arbiter and a stakeholder in this distribution, and as always, the one who distributes gets the best part. Where beneath the surface differences between parties exist shared interests, alliances, agreements, and a steadfast commitment to keeping things unchanged. Because that's what makes them all the party of the state. A system that hides behind benevolent rhetoric, where, according to them, the market fails, and they are responsible for solving these problems through rules, force, and bureaucracy. But there is no such thing as market failure. I repeat once again, there is no such thing as market failure, because the market enables social cooperation by allowing voluntary exchanges of property rights. Market failures are contradictions in terms. The only thing such intervention creates is new distortions in the price system, which in turn hinder economic calculation, planning, and investment. And that means ultimately it leads to even greater poverty or to an unhealthy entanglement of regulations like the ones we have now. For example, as is happening in Europe, killing economic growth, as I often say in my speeches. If you think the market isn't working, go and check if the government is standing in the middle. And if you find that it's not, analyze it again, because your analysis is wrong. That's why, since wokeism is nothing more and nothing less than a systematic plan by the government to justify state intervention and increase government spending, this means that our first crusade, the most important crusade, if we want to bring back the West of progress, if we want to build a new golden age, it must involve a radical reduction in the size of the state, not only in each of our countries, but also a radical reduction of all supranational bodies. Only this way can we end this vicious system by draining its resources, to give back to the taxpayer what he pays in taxes, to return to the taxpayer what belongs to him, and to put an end to the selling of privileges. There is no better way than to eliminate government bureaucracy so that there is no opportunity to sell such services. The state's role should return to only protecting life, liberty, and property. Any other functions that the state assumes for itself undermine its main task and inevitably lead to the omnipresent Leviathan from which we all suffer today. Today we are witnessing the global exhaustion of this system, which has dominated us for the past decades. As it happened in Argentina, the rest of the world is focusing on the single relevant conflict of this century and all previous ones, the conflict between free citizens and the political caste, which clings to the established order, doubling down on censorship, persecution, and destruction. Fortunately, throughout the free world, there is a silent majority that is self-organizing, and in every corner of our hemisphere, the echo of this cry for freedom can be heard. Continuation. We are facing epochal changes, a Copernican shift, the destruction of one paradigm and the building of another. And if institutions of global influence such as this House want to turn the page and participate in good faith in this new paradigm, they will have to take responsibility for the role they have played in recent decades and acknowledge to society the mea culpa that is being demanded of them. In conclusion, I want to address directly the world leaders, all those who lead both nation states and large economic groups and international organizations. both to those who are present here and to those who are not listening to me at home. The political formulas of recent decades, which I have outlined in this speech, have failed and are collapsing on their own. As I have stated, they have failed. This means that thinking like everyone else, reading what everyone else reads, saying what everyone else says, can only lead to mistakes, even if there are still many who stubbornly march toward the abyss. The last 40 years scenario has ended, and when the system stalls, history resumes. That's why I urge all world leaders step out of this scenario. It's time to be brave. It's time to dare to think and to dare to write your own verses. Because when the ideas and texts of today all say the same thing and don't say what needs to be said, being brave is exactly what it means to be timeless. It means turning back, not letting yourself be blinded by the passengers, not losing sight of the universal, of what is universal. It is about restoring the truths that were obvious to our predecessors and are at the core of the West's civilizational success, but which the one-man regime of recent decades has persecuted as if they were heresy. As Churchill said, the further back we look, the further ahead we can see. That is, we must confront the forgotten truths of our past in order to untie the knot of the present and take the next step forward as a civilization into the future. And what do I see when I look back? And that we must once again embrace the latest proven theses of economic and social success, that is the model of freedom, embrace the ideas of liberty again, and return to liberalism. That is exactly what we are doing in Argentina, and that is exactly what I believe President Trump will do in the new America. And that is exactly what we propose for all the great free countries of the world, and we intend to stop in time what is clearly leading to disaster. In short, I suggest you do this. Make the West great again. Today, just like 100, 200, or 15 years ago, Argentina has broken its chains, inviting everyone, as our anthem says, to hear the sacred cry, freedom, freedom, freedom. May heavenly forces support us. Thank you, and long live freedom.